I work as a detective. I'm starting to think my wife is a serial killer. I've seen some horrifying cases in my time as a detective, but I have a feeling this might be my most heartbreaking case ever. My wife and I live in a two-story home that we had built several decades ago. We are a ways away from the bustle of our city and our closest neighbors, who happen to be my son, Hunter, and his family. We enjoy living in relative solitude. I take our German Shepherd, Mr. Morris, on regular walks through the woods to get my mind off my job and the horrors I've experienced throughout my career. But today, my ordinary life all came crumbling down. I started my day off the same as any other. I had a cup of tea, put on my worn sneakers, and took Mr. Morris on a walk at about 6 in the morning. My wife, a school teacher, had already departed for the day. The sun was peeking out over the horizon, bathing the light layer of snow and orange light. Mr. Morris ran out ahead of me, coming to a stop at the pond that we usually fished at. He promptly began barking, staring out across the water. I came to a stop beside him and looked across the black surface. Either my eyes were playing tricks on me, or someone was on the other side of the pond. It was still dark enough that I questioned myself and rubbed my eyes before glancing again at the other bank. Nothing. Mr. Morris continued barking for a few more seconds, but eventually a squirrel caught his attention. I wasn't so easily distracted. I continued to scan the trees across the way, but finally dismissed the subtle movement as that of an animal of some sort. Mr. Morris and I continued our walk without incident. I flipped on the news and sat down with a bacon, egg, and cheese croissant. Mr. Morris likewise lapped up the fresh food that I had placed in his bowl. I took a bite of my croissant and focused on the television set. The newscaster was discussing the disappearance of a local woman, Denise Lawson. I had seen this before. The poor girl had been missing for about 2 weeks now. She was young, about 23 years old, with long red hair and green eyes. For the third time that week, I found myself remembering one of the darkest parts of my career. The disappearances had begun about a decade ago. 6 girls, aged 21 to 24, had mysteriously disappeared over the span of about 2 years. I will never forget their names: Patricia Bledsoe, Karen Whitaker, Julia Voss, Jamie Calloway, Nia Justice, and Felicia Smith. They all had 2 things in common: red hair and green eyes. Only the partial remains of 2 of them had ever been found. There had been no forensic evidence and no groundbreaking leads. Someone claimed to have seen a man with one of the girls on the night she disappeared, but that was about as close as we got to ever identifying the sick person who was taking these girls. This case was more than a little personal for me. Patricia Bledsoe was my wife's niece. I had known her since she was a little girl. I stared down listlessly at my croissant, having suddenly lost my appetite. I put the plate on the end table and got up, headed to my computer and tried to keep my mind occupied with some online solitaire. A few hours later, I got the call. It was, to my surprise, one of the officers from the station that I had known for a few years. "Hey, Detective Vincent," he said. It was my coworker, Barry. He sounded nervous. "How you doing, buddy?" I asked. Barry hesitated. I'm good, Detective Vincent. "Sir, it's about your wife." I could feel my insides twisting up, like they had when I had first heard about Patricia's disappearance. "Where's my wife, Barry?" "Sir, we've brought her in for questioning. She's a suspect in the disappearance of Denise Lawson and Tatiana Graves." I got to the station as fast as I could. When I arrived, I confronted the captain, a man I had known and collaborated with for many years. "Eric Lloyd." "Eric, what the hell are you getting at? Bringing my wife here to be hounded for something we both know full and well she didn't effing do?" 3 other officers stepped forward, but Eric subtly waved them off. He was a tall and tired man with a clean-shaven face. He looked me in the eyes before responding. "Look, Dario, you know I have the utmost respect for both you and your wife, Raven. You were at my wedding for Christ's sake, but I have to do my job regardless. Surely you understand that." I was fuming. What could possibly make you think that Raven was involved in any of these incidents? If I had a criminal living under my roof, don't you think I would know? There was a glint in Eric's eyes, and I already knew what he was going to say. "I don't know, Detective. Your son was committing arson while he was still in your house, if I remember correctly." "How dare you bring that up?" Eric sighed. "Look, just wait a few and your wife will be right out, okay? But heed my warning, don't interfere with our investigation." I paced back and forth for almost 10 more minutes, cursing indiscriminately. When Raven finally walked up to me, I didn't even notice her. "Honey, Raven, are you okay?" I took her in my arms, and then stood back, examining her closely. She looked great for a woman of 54, her blonde hair falling past her shoulders. Her heart-shaped face was full of life, as it had been when I first met her all those years ago. "Yeah, old man, I'm fine. Let's go home, I want to see Hunter." I could feel the eyes of the other officers on me as I guided my wife out of the station. We decided that she could pick her car up from the school when I dropped her off the next day. Then, of course, the conversation immediately turned to why she had been brought to the station in the first place. Eric picked me up because, well, it hurts to say this, but apparently I was one of the last people seen with Tatiana Graves before she went missing. "Who is she? You've never told me about any friends with that name." Raven sighed and looked out of the passenger window. "Tatiana was a former student of mine. She graduated a few years ago, but when I had drinks with Mariam a few nights ago, we happened to run into her. We had a good old time. Nothing seemed to be bothering her." "Eric's always been trigger happy," I muttered through gritted teeth. "When I see him in town again, I'll be sure to give him a piece of my mind." "No, Dario, it's fine. Eric was just doing his job. He and the other officers were very polite during the interview. They don't mean any harm." I was still aggravated about the whole situation, but I was happy to see that my wife was okay. I pulled up to our son's house, and we were greeted at the door by his wife Ellie and their 3-year-old Gabriel. My son Hunter was still at work, but Ellie kept us entertained. After about an hour or so, though, I wanted to go and check on Mr. Morris. Ellie volunteered to drop Raven off after Hunter got back from work, so I went back to the house alone. Mr. Morris was waiting for me in the yard. I scratched him behind his ears and we both went inside. Curious, and with time to kill, I set my eyes on the computer again. I had sworn to myself long ago that I would be the one to catch this murderer. I searched Tatiana Graves' name. When her image popped up, I groaned, shaking my head. She bore a pretty damn good resemblance to Patricia, as did all of the others who had vanished before her. It hurt to look at her for too long, so I scrolled down to read more info about her disappearance. She was 21, having graduated from the school that my wife taught at 3 years ago. Besides that, nothing else was really known about her. There were nothing said about her hobbies or occupation. I scrolled down to the comments section, wondering if anyone might post anything more in depth. The first comment I saw read horror. She got what she deserved. Either these women were horrible, horrible trolls, or else Tatiana had built a sort of reputation for herself. I was done with this regardless. It was time for a walk. The air was as frigid as I wanted to be towards Eric the next time I saw him. I trudged along behind Mr. Morris, who stopped to pee on every tree before we came to the pond again. I remembered the strange movement that I had seen earlier that Diane decided to investigate. I made my way to the other side of the pond, which was, quite honestly, a rarity. I intended to look for footprints, but the light snow had already melted. Still, I investigated the area and came to a quick conclusion. Someone had most definitely been here. A piece of black plastic, as though from a trash bag, had caught onto a hanging branch. It hadn't faded in the sun, nor was it dirty from prolonged exposure. I reached up and fingered it curiously, then looked around. Mr. Morris was lying on the ground, chewing on something. "Hey, spit it out, you scoundrel!" Mr. Morris looked up at me guiltily. I could see something gold glinting in his mouth. I knelt down and pulled it out, staring at it in disbelief. It was a bracelet. What the? I had never seen it before. Raven definitely didn't own one like it. I investigated the area further, but found nothing else out of the ordinary. I decided to head further out into the property. If someone was trespassing here, they had chosen the wrong day to do it. I had my pistol in a holster on my waist as per usual. I kept one hand on it as Mr. Morris and I pressed on. I hadn't been on this side of the pond in a while. The area was heavily wooded, and I honestly had no reason to ever come this far. My son Hunter, however, was another story. When he was going through his pyromania phase, he had been out here burning whatever he could get his hands on a regular basis. In the days before that, we had built him a treehouse on a tree that he had picked out when he was 6 years old. That same old treehouse was still somehow in one piece, though the rickety ladder that he had once used was another story entirely. I paused, my breath rising in front of me as I surveyed the scene before me. There was an indent in the grass and soil down below, indicating that the old ladder had been lying on the ground for quite some time recently. Now, however, it was leaned up against the tree, leading up to the treehouse. I could feel a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. I looked down at the bracelet, then up at the treehouse. Someone had recently climbed up there, and I suspected that they were still there. Mr. Morris sat and watched me as I slowly approached the ladder. I put one hand on it, staring up at the old wooden treehouse. "My name is Dario Vincent, and if anyone is up there, you have trespassed on my property. Come out now and I won't get the proper authorities involved." Silence. The wind blew, fluttering my jacket and hood. I kept my eyes on the little windows of the treehouse, searching for any movement. Nothing. Okay. If you aren't going to come out, I'll have to come and get you myself. I put one foot on the ladder, which gave a sudden shake. I should have known that I was going to regret the cheeseburger from the other day. I began slowly ascending the ladder, which quivered perilously with every run I reached. I held the bracelet tight in my hand as I climbed, determined to get to the bottom of this. There was a good chance that whoever was in the treehouse was a part of this whole thing. A foul, terribly familiar stench suddenly wafted into my nostrils, the smell of a rotting body. I paused, now nearly at the top of the ladder. No way. There couldn't be a... I put my hand on the top rung. The sound of a gunshot exploded nearby, more terrible than thunder in the heaviest storm. Mr. Morris started barking frantically, yet I pursued up the ladder, the smell of death becoming stronger with each step. Inside the treehouse, it was a scene from a horror film. Lying on the floor was the unmistakable decomposed body of a young woman. Long red hair, green eyes, Denise Lawson. The gunshot hadn't come from the treehouse, but from farther in the forest, perhaps an unfortunate hunter who'd stumbled upon our land. The treehouse had been occupied. I found a few articles of clothing, men's clothing, strewn around the tiny space, a makeshift bed with blankets and pillows, and empty food containers. Tucked under one of the blankets was a notepad, filled with messy handwriting. I picked it up and began to read. It was a diary, entries dating back a few months, entries detailing the abduction, entries full of remorse, entries confessing the crime. My heart pounded in my chest as I read the final entry. I couldn't resist the urge. They reminded me so much of Mom, of her fiery red hair and emerald eyes. I didn't want to hurt them. I just wanted to be with her, to feel like she was there with me, but I lost control every time. "Goodbye, Dad. I'm sorry." It was Hunter's handwriting. I heard footsteps coming up the ladder.